In the world of the ultra-rich, love is a currency and marriage is a contract. For tech billionaire Julian Croft, that contract was about to be spectacularly breached. He was on top of the world, sitting in New York's most exclusive restaurant, ready to toast a future with his beautiful mistress. He believed he controlled everything: his empire, his narrative, his women. But he forgot one rule of business and of life: never underestimate the woman you've wronged. What you are about to hear is the story of a single dinner, a single toast that ignited a war where the only thing more shocking than the betrayal is the revenge. The air in Celeste, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign tasted of money. It was a low, humming symphony of hushed power deals, the delicate clink of Christophe silver against Bernardaud china, and the subtle, intoxicating scent of truffle oil and vintage Bordeaux. Tonight, Julian Croft, the tech world's golden shark, was the symphony's conductor. At 42, Julian possessed the kind of predatory grace that came from a decade of hostile takeovers and market disruptions. His company, Ethereum Dynamics, had revolutionized data security, making him a billionaire before his 35th birthday. He had a jawline that seemed carved from granite eyes the color of a stormy sea, and a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than the waiter's car. Everything about him was a testament to his own relentless, brutal ambition. Across the table, bathed in the soft, flattering glow of the Murano glass chandelier, sat Isabella Rossi. She was 28, an art curator, whose ambition was a perfect fiery match for his own. Her beauty was a weapon, cascading raven hair, lips the color of a blood ruby, and a mind that was sharp, cynical, and utterly captivated by the power Julian wielded. She wore a slinky, emerald green dress that clung to her like a second skin, a stark, vibrant jewel against the restaurant's muted palette of cream and gold. "You're staring," Isabella murmured, a playful smile gracing her lips as she swirled the deep red liquid in her glass. It was a 1998 Petrus, a wine Julian had ordered with a casual flick of his wrist. "I'm admiring my future," Julian replied, his voice a low, possessive rumble. He reached across the table, his fingers tracing the delicate bones of her hand. "This is where you belong, Izzy. Not in some stuffy gallery, but here, with me." Isabella's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "It's a beautiful thought, Julian, but thoughts don't keep you warm at night. Contracts do. Promises do." She let her thumb brush against his, a silent, demanding caress. "She's still there, in our house." The she was Eleanor Croft née Vance. If Julian was the brutal, disruptive force of new money, Eleanor was the serene, unshakable fortress of old money. Her family, the Vances, had been shaping New York's financial and cultural landscape since the days of the Rockefellers. Their wealth was quiet, vast, and woven into the very fabric of the city. Their marriage 5 years ago had been the ultimate merger, his disruptive genius, her family's unimpeachable legacy. To the world, they were a power couple. To Julian, the marriage had become a gilded cage. Eleanor was grace, poise, and predictability. She ran their 3 homes with terrifying efficiency, chaired the city's most important charities, and understood the nuances of a hostile board meeting as well as he did. But her passion, he felt, was as cool and curated as the museum wings her family endowed. "Eleanor understands the arrangement," Julian said, a dismissive wave of his hand. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Eleanor understood arrangements, yes, but she believed their marriage was a sacred one. "Does she understand that you love me?" Isabella pressed her dark eyes, searching his. Does she understand that you're going to leave her? This was their nightly ritual, the delicate, dangerous dance of reassurance. He had been promising to leave Eleanor for a year, ever since this affair had ignited from a spark of mutual ambition into a consuming fire. The timing has to be perfect, he said, the same excuse he always used. Ethereum is about to close the Helios merger. Her father Arthur sits on the board of the target company. I can't risk him torpedoing the deal of a lifetime for a domestic squabble. A domestic squabble. Isabella's voice was laced with ice. She pulled her hand away. Is that what I am to you, Julian? A squabble. He saw the flicker of doubt, the threat of her pulling away, and he moved to extinguish it instantly. He was a master of control. No, he said, his voice softening, becoming hypnotic. You are the deal of a lifetime. You're the only thing that feels real in my life. He signaled to the sommelier, who approached their table with a bottle of Dom Perignon Rosé, chilled to crystalline perfection. What's this for? Isabella asked, her mood shifting, as the man popped the cork with a gentle, expensive sigh. For us, Julian declared, his eyes locked on hers as the shimmering pink liquid filled their flutes. For the future. He raised his glass. The low hum of the restaurant seemed to fade into the background. For a moment, it was just the two of them, suspended in a bubble of champagne and illicit promises. Isabella. He began, his voice resonating with a theatrical sincerity that had swayed boardrooms and investors for years. I want to make a toast. He stood up, a move of such brazen arrogance that a few nearby diners, recognizing him from the cover of Forbes, paused their conversations to watch. To a new beginning, Julian proclaimed, his voice loud enough to carry. To a life of passion, not just obligation. To the woman who has shown me what true happiness is. To the future, Mrs. Croft. He looked directly at Isabella, a triumphant smirk on his face. To you, Izzy. Isabella's breath hitched. Her eyes glistened with a mixture of shock and victory. This was it, a public declaration. There was no going back. She raised her glass to meet his, and then a sound. It was not a loud sound, but it cut through the room with the sharp, clean precision of a diamond slicing through glass. Click, clack, click, clack. The sound of a woman's heels on the polished marble floor of the foyer. It was a steady, unhurried rhythm, a rhythm of purpose. The conversations that had paused to watch Julian's toast did not resume. Instead, a new, deeper silence fell. Heads turned not with casual curiosity, but with a sudden electric tension. The air crackled. Julian's smile froze on his face. He knew that sound. It was the sound of his wife's Manolo Blahniks, a sound he usually associated with charity galas and board meetings, a sound that had absolutely no place here in the inner sanctum of his betrayal. He turned slowly, his heart a cold stone in his chest, and there she was. Eleanor Croft stood in the archway that separated the main dining room from the foyer. She was not crying. She was not hysterical. She was a portrait of lethal serenity. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored black dress from a designer so exclusive it had no logo. It was designed to accommodate the gentle, unmistakable swell of her pregnancy, a pregnancy Julian had announced with her, with performative pride, at a press conference just 2 months ago. Her blonde hair was swept back in a classic chignon, and the famous Vance sapphires, a cold, deep blue, glittered at her ears and throat. They matched the ice in her eyes. Her gaze swept past the curious onlookers, past the horrified maitre d', and settled on the scene at Julian's table. She took in the champagne, the intimate proximity of their hands just moments before, the victorious gleam in Isabella's eyes, and the damning toast still hanging in the air. Her expression did not change, but a universe of understanding and judgment passed through her eyes. Julian felt a flush of heat crawl up his neck. The hunter had just become the prey. He saw it all in an instant. The public humiliation, the scandal, the inevitable, catastrophic call to her father. Isabella, for her part, straightened her spine. The initial shock gave way to a surge of defiance. Good, she thought. Let's have it out. Let the war begin tonight. She placed her hand possessively on Julian's arm, staking her claim. Julian, seeing the move, wanted to flinch away, but was paralyzed. Eleanor took a single deliberate step into the room. Then another. Her pace never faltered as she walked the long, silent path toward their table. The only sound was the steady, ominous click-clack of her heels on the marble. It sounded like a countdown. She stopped not beside Julian, but at the head of the table, a position of power. Her eyes did not even flicker toward Isabella. She addressed her husband, her voice perfectly modulated, yet carrying the chilling weight of a death sentence. "Julian," she said, and the name was an indictment. What a surprise. I didn't realize Ethereum was celebrating the Helios merger so publicly. Or is this a different kind of merger you're toasting? Julian finally found his voice, a strangled, pathetic thing. "Eleanor, what are you doing here? You should be at home resting." A ghost of a smile, cold and devoid of all warmth, touched Eleanor's lips. "My doctor recommended a short walk, and I had a meeting nearby." She paused, letting the lie hang in the air, a lie so blatant it was an insult. "But I must say, Julian, your choice of toast is revealing. The future Mrs. Croft." Her eyes finally dismissively flicked to Isabella. "I hope you got her a prenup. The first one can be so terribly messy to untangle." Isabella bristled, opening her mouth to speak, but Julian shot her a silencing look. "Eleanor, this is not the time or the place." "On the contrary," Eleanor replied, her voice dropping to an intimate, terrifying whisper that only they could hear, while the rest of the room watched the silent, brutal pantomime. "I think this is the perfect time and place. A public declaration deserves a public response, don't you think?" She then did something no one expected. She reached into her impossibly small, elegant clutch and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. She didn't unfold it. She simply placed it on the crisp, white tablecloth next to Julian's plate. "I was going to have this messengered to your office tomorrow morning, but since you're here celebrating your new beginnings, I thought I could save on the courier fee." Her gaze was unwavering. "It's a preliminary injunction, Julian, filed an hour ago. My father's legal team is remarkably efficient." Julian stared at the paper as if it were a viper. An injunction against what? His assets. The company. Eleanor seemed to read his mind. "It freezes your personal accounts, all of them. The St. Regis suite you've been keeping for Miss Rossi here, it's under your personal Amex Centurion card. That card was declined about 30 minutes ago. I imagine her things are being packed by hotel security as we speak." Isabella's face went white. The victory of moments ago curdled into pure, unadulterated panic. She looked at Julian, her eyes wide with disbelief and accusation. He had told her everything was secure, that he was in control. And the donation. Eleanor continued, her voice relentlessly calm, "The one you made from an Ethereum marketing account to the Rossi Contemporary Art Fund. The one that paid for her gallery's new exhibit." My father found that particularly interesting. Apparently the board has some questions about off-book expenditures. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't just a scorned wife's emotional outburst. This was a coordinated attack. This was a tactical strike, executed with the cold, brutal precision of a Vance. He had been outmaneuvered. He, Julian Croft, had been played. Eleanor looked from his ashen face to Isabella's panicked one. She gave a small, almost pitying sigh. "You see, Julian," she said, her voice a final, devastating blow. "You toast to the future, but you seem to have forgotten. My family, we don't just invest in the future. We own it." She turned her back straight, her head held high, and without another word, she walked away. The click-clack of her heels was no longer a countdown. It was the sound of a gavel falling, the sound of judgment rendered. The silence she left in her wake was absolute, broken only by the fizzing of the now unwanted champagne in Julian Croft's glass. He was no longer the conductor of the symphony. He was just a man in a very expensive suit, in a very expensive restaurant, who had just discovered that the gilded cage he resented was the only thing that had been holding him up. And his wife, his pregnant, unassuming wife, had just walked away with the key. For a full minute after Eleanor's departure, the scene at the table was a frozen tableau. Julian stood, his hand still holding the champagne flute. The toast turned to ash in his mouth. Isabella sat rigid. The defiant posture she'd adopted now crumbled, revealing the terrified young woman beneath the veneer of a seductress. The curious eyes of New York's elite were on them no longer with awe, but with the ravenous appetite of sharks sensing blood in the water. The low hum of the restaurant had returned, but it was different now, charged with gossip speculation and the sweet, irresistible schadenfreude of the wealthy watching one of their own begin to fall. Julian was the first to move. He slammed his glass down, the pink champagne sloshing over the rim onto the pristine tablecloth, a stain spreading like his public disgrace. "Get up," he snarled at Isabella, his voice a harsh, guttural whisper. "My things, at the St. Regis," she stammered, her mind racing. Her clothes, her laptop documents, her entire curated life was in that suite. "Forget them," Julian snapped, throwing a black American Express card on the table without even looking at the bill. "We're leaving. Now." He strode towards the exit, not with the confident swagger of his entrance, but with the hurried, head-down pace of a defeated general retreating from the battlefield. Isabella, grabbing her clutch, scurried behind him, the emerald dress that had felt so powerful an hour ago now feeling like a gaudy costume. The walk of shame through the dining room was an agony of averted gazes and poorly concealed whispers. The moment they were outside in the cool night air, the facade of unity shattered. "What the hell was that?" Julian Isabella's voice was sharp, accusatory. "You said you had it under control. You said she didn't know anything." "An injunction, my gallery." Julian rounded on her, his face a mask of incandescent fury. "You think I planned this? You and your constant pushing. When, Julian, when? You wanted a public declaration. Well, you got one. How does it feel me? You were the one who stood up and made that idiotic toast." She shot back, tears of rage and fear welling in her eyes. "You were showing off. And now my name, my gallery is going to be dragged into your sordid divorce. My sordid divorce." He let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Oh, it's going to be so much more than that, sweetheart." You heard her. This isn't about the affair. This is about Ethereum. This is about her father. The name hung in the air between them, Arthur Vance. A titan of industry. A man who moved markets with a single phone call and whose reputation for ruthless, quiet competence was legendary. Julian had always seen him as a relic, a dinosaur of the old world. Now he felt the weight of that dinosaur's foot on his neck. His phone buzzed. It was his CFO, Mark Renshaw. He ignored it. It buzzed again. His chief legal counsel, Anya Sharma. He ignored that, too. He knew what they were calling about. They would have received alerts the second the injunction hit. The gears of war were already turning. "Get a taxi," he ordered Isabella, his mind already spinning, calculating, trying to find a countermove in a game that had been rigged against him. "Go to a hotel. The Mandarin, the Plaza. I don't care. Use your own name. Don't call me." "Don't call you." Isabella's voice rose in disbelief. "Julian, you can't just cut at me loose. I'm not cutting you loose." He lied, his voice strained with impatience. "I'm containing the situation. I need to think. I need to call my lawyers. Now go." He turned his back on her and started walking, pulling out his phone, his thumb hovering over Anya's name. He had to get ahead of this. He had to fight back. But as he looked up at the glittering, indifferent skyline of Manhattan, a cold dread seeped into his bones. Eleanor hadn't just thrown a rock into his life. She had detonated a bomb at its very foundation. Meanwhile, Eleanor Croft did not go home to rest. The moment her black town car pulled away from Celeste, the mask of icy composure dissolved not into tears, but into a look of profound, weary determination. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation began to recede, leaving behind the deep, aching throb of betrayal. The baby inside her gave a gentle kick, a small, innocent reminder of what was truly at stake. She placed a hand on her stomach, a silent promise. To the offices of Vance Holdings' driver, she said, her voice clear and firm. 20 minutes later, she was stepping out of an elevator into the hushed, opulent world of the 70th floor of One Vanderbilt. Unlike the flashy open-plan chaos of Ethereum dynamics, the Vance Holdings offices were a sanctuary of dark wood, old leather, and priceless art. It smelled of power that was inherited, not seized. Arthur Vance was waiting for her in his corner office, the panoramic view of the city, a sparkling tapestry behind him. He was a man in his late 60s, with a full head of silver hair and eyes that held the same cool blue intelligence as his daughter's. He wasn't pacing. He was sitting calmly in a leather armchair, a tumbler of Macallan 25 in his hand. He rose as she entered, his stern face softening with paternal concern. He walked over and embraced her, his hand gently patting her back. "It's done," Eleanor said, her voice muffled against his suit jacket. "I know. I've already had 3 calls," he replied, his tone grim. "One from a board member at Helios, asking if the merger is still viable. Another from a journalist at the Journal sniffing for a story, and a third from Julian's lawyer, Anya Sharma, asking for a ceasefire." He led her to the armchair opposite his. "Did he crumble?" Eleanor sank into the soft leather, a wave of exhaustion washing over her, like a cheap suit in the rain. But Arthur, seeing him with her, it was everything I imagined, and worse. "I know, my dear. I know." He let her have the moment, the space to feel the personal pain before they addressed the business. He had never liked Julian Croft. He'd seen the rapacious hunger in the young man's eyes from the start. But he had trusted Eleanor's judgment, a mistake he had been quietly preparing to rectify for over a year. The PI was discreet, he asked. Eleanor nodded. Mr. Donovan was at a table in the corner posing as a tourist. He has an audio recording of the toast, and high-resolution photos of the entire evening. Arthur's lips thinned into a grim line. Good. We'll need it all. He took a sip of his scotch. The injunction was just the first shot across the bow, Eleanor. A distraction. It freezes his personal liquidity, makes his life difficult, puts the mistress in a panic. But the real fight is for Ethereum. Eleanor looked up, her eyes clear and focused once more. The wounded wife was gone, replaced by the Vance heiress. What's the next move, the board? Arthur said simply. Julian's power is absolute only so long as the board believes he is infallible. His personal life has just become a massive liability. In the world of multi-billion-dollar mergers, optics are everything. The Helios board will be spooked. Our own board members at Ethereum, the ones loyal to us, are already drafting a letter calling for an emergency session to discuss a crisis of leadership. He'll fight it, Eleanor stated. He'll paint me as a vengeful, hysterical wife. He'll use the pregnancy, say I'm not thinking clearly. Let him, Arthur said, a predatory glint in his eye. He'll underestimate you. He always has. That's his weakness. But this isn't just about his infidelity anymore. That's the pretext. The real leverage is the money. He gestured to a thick, leather-bound folder on his desk. Donovan's team didn't just follow Julian to restaurants. They followed the money. The donation to the Rossi Gallery was sloppy, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. We've found a series of shell corporations, small, untraceable payments authorized by him, funneled out of Ethereum's R&D budgets and into accounts that, well, they certainly aren't funding data security research. A cold realization dawned on Eleanor. He's embezzling. It's more sophisticated than that, Arthur corrected. He's using company funds to seed a new private venture. A personal project he's been building in the shadows, ready to launch after the Helios merger, gave him an unassailable position. He planned to use Ethereum's resources to build his next empire, one that was entirely his own, with no Vance connection. The audacity of it, the sheer calculated betrayal, was breathtaking. He hadn't just been cheating on her in their bed. He'd been cheating on her in the boardroom, using her family's legacy and investment as a launch pad for his own secret ambitions. And the Mistress, Eleanor asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Is she involved in this? Arthur allowed himself a small, cold smile. This was the part of the plan that was as vicious as it was brilliant. That, he said, is the most interesting part. The primary shell corporation, the one receiving the largest payments, is a company registered in the Cayman Islands. It's called IR Holdings. The sole director is listed as Isabella Rossi. Eleanor stared at her father, the full diabolical scope of Julian's plan and her father's counterplan becoming clear. Isabella wasn't just a mistress. Julian had made her a co-conspirator. He had woven her into his financial treason, likely without her even understanding the full implications, thinking she was just signing papers for a future investment. He had made her a tool, and in doing so he had handed the Vances a weapon. She's his liability, Eleanor breathed. She's his ruin, Arthur corrected. Julian can try to paint you as the scorned wife, but when the board sees evidence that he has funneled millions of dollars of shareholder money into a shell company run by his mistress, an art curator with zero tech experience, his credibility will be incinerated. They won't see a domestic squabble. They will see fraud. They will see a man so reckless, so arrogant, that he put the entire company at risk for his affair. Eleanor stood up and walked to the vast window, looking down at the city lights. A city her family had helped build. A city Julian had tried to conquer. He had seen her as a beautiful passive asset, a bridge to the old world he needed to legitimize himself. He had never for one moment seen her as an adversary. "So we don't just divorce him," she said, her reflection a determined silhouette against the skyline. "We don't just take our money back. We take the company." Ethereum was built on a foundation of Vance capital and connections, Arthur said, joining her at the window. "We are simply reclaiming our investment. The board will need a steady hand to guide them through the Helios merger after Julian is gone. Someone who represents stability. Someone with the name Vance." He put his hand on her shoulder. "They will need you, Eleanor." The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. To step out from behind the shadow of her husband and her father. To take the reins of the very company that was meant to be his crowning achievement. The baby kicked again, stronger this time. Eleanor smiled a true, genuine smile. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about legacy. Her legacy. And the legacy of the child she was carrying. Julian thought he was toasting his future. But all he had done was secure his place in the past. The war had begun, but in the quiet, wood-paneled office high above the city, it was already won. All that was left was the execution. The 3 days following the detonation at Celeste were a masterclass in corporate warfare, fought not with armies, but with whispered phone calls, clandestine meetings, and the precise surgical deployment of information. Julian Croft, for the first time in his professional life, was on the defensive, and he was hemorrhaging support at an alarming rate. He had barricaded himself in his office at Ethereum's gleaming headquarters, a glass and steel monument to his own ego. He was a silent lion, pacing, shouting into his phone, and trying to shore up a dam that was cracking in a dozen places at once. The preliminary injunction was a constant, humiliating nuisance. Every transaction he tried to make was a struggle. But the real damage was to his reputation. The story of the toast at Celeste had ripped through New York's financial circles like a virus. It wasn't the affair that shocked people. Infidelity was practically a sport in their world. It was the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of the public display and the immediate, brutal retaliation from the Vances. It painted Julian not as a powerful player, but as a reckless fool who had misjudged his opponent. His calls to board members were met with cool, non-committal responses. His attempts to reach Arthur Vance were stonewalled. His legal team, led by the formidable Anya Sharma, was flying blind, trying to fight an enemy they couldn't see, one who had already anticipated their every move. Isabella was a ghost. After their fight, she had checked into the Mandarin Oriental under a false name, her panic escalating with every unanswered text to Julian. He was ignoring her, treating her like a liability to be managed, not the queen he had promised to crown. Her gallery was in chaos, with donors calling, spooked by the rumors. Her dream, which had seemed so tangible, was rapidly dissolving into a nightmare. She was isolated and terrified. The emergency board meeting was called for Friday morning. The stated purpose on the agenda was vague: to address a crisis of leadership and review, executive fiduciary conduct. Julian knew exactly what it meant. It was a coup. He prepared for it like a general preparing for a final, desperate battle. He and Anya worked around the clock, drafting statements, preparing defenses. He would paint this as a personal vendetta, a family matter spilling into the boardroom. He would portray Eleanor as emotionally unstable, her actions driven by hormones and jealousy. It was a disgusting, misogynistic strategy, but it was all he had. He would remind the board of his genius, of the billions in value he had created. He would bully and charm them into submission, as he had always done. Friday morning arrived grey and menacing. The Ethereum boardroom was on the top floor, a sterile, intimidating space dominated by a colossal black granite table. The mood was tense, the air thick with anticipation. The board members, a collection of grizzled industry veterans and venture capitalists, avoided his gaze as they took their seats. They knew a bloodletting was coming. Julian took his place at the head of the table, projecting an aura of calm, defiant control. Arthur Vance sat opposite him, his face an unreadable patrician mask. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian began, his voice smooth and commanding. "I know why we're here. My father-in-law has decided to air my family's private laundry in a professional setting. It's regrettable, it's unprofessional, and frankly, it's beneath the dignity of this company." He was about to launch into his prepared speech about Eleanor's delicate condition when the boardroom doors opened. Every head turned. Eleanor Croft walked in. She was not dressed for a charity luncheon. She wore a slate-grey power suit that was expertly tailored to her maternal form. Her hair pulled back, her face composed and resolute. She carried a leather portfolio. She wasn't the vengeful wife from the gossip columns. She was a shareholder representative. She took a seat next to her father, directly in Julian's line of sight. Eleanor Julian said, his voice tight with fury. "This is a closed board meeting." "I'm aware," she replied, her voice steady and clear, echoing in the silent room. "I am here today, representing the Vance family's 18% stake in Ethereum Dynamics. My father has granted me his proxy. I have a right to be here." The move was a masterstroke. It reframed her presence instantly. She was not a victim. She was a power player. Arthur Vance spoke for the first time, his voice calm and authoritative. "Julian, we are here because the board has received credible information that raises serious questions about your judgment and your management of company assets. This is not a family matter. This is a shareholder matter." What credible information? Julian scoffed, though a knot of dread was tightening in his stomach. Vague accusations. Rumors started by a disgruntled wife. "Not accusations, Julian," Eleanor said, opening her portfolio on the table. "Evidence." She slid a document across the polished granite surface towards the lead independent director, a man named Henderson. "This is a sworn affidavit from a Mr. Charles Donovan, a licensed private investigator. It contains a full transcript and audio recording of your toast at Celeste, in which you designated Miss Isabella Rossi, the future Mrs. Croft, a woman who is not your wife." A murmur went through the room. It was one thing to hear a rumor, another to know it was recorded. "And this," Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength, "is a copy of the Articles of Incorporation for a shell company in the Cayman Islands called IR Holdings. As you can see, the sole director is Miss Isabella Rossi." She slid another document across the table. "And this is a detailed financial summary prepared by forensic accountants from Deloitte, tracing a series of payments over the last 8 months. A total of $14.7 million transferred from Ethereum's research and development cost centers directly into the accounts of IR Holdings. Payments that you personally authorized, Julian." Silence. A deep, profound, tomb-like silence. Julian's face had gone completely pale. The blood roared in his ears. This was it. The ambush. He had walked right into it. He looked from the damning papers to Eleanor's implacable face. He had seen her as wallpaper in his life, and she had been building a guillotine behind it. Henderson, the lead director, looked up from the papers, his face grim. "Julian, is this true? Did you divert nearly $15 million of shareholder money into a private company run by your mistress?" Julian's mind raced, searching for a lie, an explanation, anything. It was a seed investment, a stealth project for a new AI art authentication platform. It would have created huge value for Ethereum down the line. His explanation sounded weak, pathetic, even to his own ears. And then the final devastating twist, the one that proved the Vances weren't just trying to wound him, they were determined to annihilate him. "An interesting theory," Julian Eleanor said, "that Miss Rosie, an art curator, was your secret partner in a high-tech venture. We thought the board might want to ask her about that directly." She nodded towards the boardroom door. Anya Sharma, Julian's own lawyer, opened it, and walked in Isabella Rossi. If Julian was pale, Isabella was translucent. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face a mask of terror and betrayal. She was flanked by a stern-looking man in a suit, her own lawyer. Julian stared at her, then at Anya. "Anya, what is the meaning of this?" he roared, feeling the last vestiges of his control snap. "You're my lawyer, and as your lawyer, my duty is to advise you on mitigating catastrophic risk." Anya said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Mr. Vance and Mrs. Croft approached Miss Rosie 2 days ago. They made her an offer, full immunity from any potential fraud charges, plus a legal fund to protect her gallery in exchange for her full cooperation. Betrayal. Absolute betrayal from every corner." They showed her the incorporation documents, Julian Anya continued. They explained what a shell corporation is. They explained what embezzlement is. They explained her own personal legal exposure. Faced with the choice between loyalty to you and a potential 5 to 10-year prison sentence, Miss Rossi made a very rational decision. Isabella wouldn't look at him. She looked at Eleanor, who gave her a slight, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Henderson turned to Isabella. "Miss Rossi, were you aware that the funds being transferred into IR Holdings were coming from Ethereum Dynamics' R&D budget?" Isabella took a shaky breath. Her lawyer placed a hand on her shoulder. "No," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Julian told me it was his own money. He said it was an investment vehicle he was setting up for our future. He had me sign papers. I didn't understand what they were. I trusted him." The words, a pathetic mix of truth and self-preservation, were the final nails in Julian's coffin. He had been cast as the villain, the master manipulator. She was the ingenue, the pawn he had exploited. He had given her power over him, and his enemies had turned it into a weapon. The love he had professed, the future he had toasted it, had all been transactional. And in the end, she had made a better transaction with his wife. Julian Croft looked around the table. He saw no allies. He saw no support. He saw only the cold, hard calculus of business in the eyes of the men and women looking back at him. They weren't looking at a genius anymore. They were looking at a liability that needed to be cut loose before it sank the entire ship. He had been so focused on conquering the world that he had never bothered to secure his own kingdom. He had dismissed his wife, used his mistress, and underestimated his father-in-law. And in one brutal, perfectly executed maneuver, they had taken it all away. Arthur Vance's voice cut through the silence, calm and final. "I believe we have a motion on the floor," he said, looking at Henderson. "A motion to remove Julian Croft as CEO and chairman of the board of Ethereum Dynamics, effective immediately pending a full internal and federal investigation. Julian didn't even stay to hear the vote. He stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. He didn't look at Eleanor or Isabella. He looked at nothing. With the last shred of his dignity, he walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind his company, his legacy, and his future. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing him out of the world he had built. The siege was over. Of course, here is a rewritten, expanded version of the final chapter, adding more depth, detail, and emotional resonance to the aftermath. The boardroom door clicked shut behind Julian Croft, the sound as final and absolute as a coffin lid being sealed. The silence that followed in the hallway was more deafening than the accusations he'd left behind. For a moment he just stood there, suspended in a state of pure shock, his mind a white-hot static hum. He was Julian Croft. Men like him didn't lose. They didn't get outmaneuvered. They didn't get erased. He walked stiff-legged and robotic towards the private elevator that responded only to his fingerprint. He pressed his thumb against the sensor. Access denied. A cold fury, sharp and clarifying, sliced through the fog. He tried again. Access denied. They were already cutting him out, severing the digital tethers of his identity with cold, swift efficiency. He was forced to turn and walk towards the public elevator bank, his footsteps echoing in what was an hour ago his kingdom. As he waited, a junior analyst, a kid he wouldn't have recognized, stepped out of a nearby office, saw him, and his eyes widened in a mixture of awe and pity before he quickly looked away. The word was already out. The king was dead. His first destination was not a home he had none left, but the sterile sanctuary of the Fiduciary Trust Bank of New York, where his personal fortune was managed. The power of Ethereum might be gone, but his billions were his own. He would liquidate. He would scorch the earth. He would build something new and crush them all. The rage was a fuel propelling him through the revolving doors into the bank's hushed marble lobby. He didn't wait in line. He strode directly to the private banking office of his longtime manager, a man named Sterling. Sterling, usually obsequious and eager to please, met him with a face full of professional sorrow. "Julian, I was just about to call you," he began, wringing his hands. "Don't bother, Julian," cut him off. His voice raw. "I want to initiate a transfer. 500 million to an offshore account, now." Sterling paled. He cleared his throat and avoided Julian's gaze, looking at a file on his desk. "Julian, I can't do that. We received a notice from the SEC an hour ago, and a federal court order. It's tied to the injunction from your wife's legal team, but it's broader now." "What are you talking about?" Julian snarled. "This is my personal wealth. It has nothing to do with Ethereum. The notice alleges that a significant portion of your personal seed money, the capital you used to launch Ethereum, was entangled with early Vance family investments," Sterling said, practically whispering the words. "And given the new allegations of financial misconduct at the corporate level, all assets, corporate and personal, linked to the Croft and Vance names are effectively frozen, pending a full forensic review." "I'm sorry, Julian. My hands are tied." Julian stared at him. The rage inside him didn't explode. It imploded, leaving a black hole in its place. It was the ultimate checkmate. The Vances hadn't just invested in his company. They had underwritten his life. and now they were calling in the debt. He wasn't just fired. He was bankrupt. He was a man with a 10-figure net worth on paper and not a dollar he could actually touch. He turned and walked out of the bank, not a caged lion anymore, but a ghost invisible to the world of wealth he had once commanded. His final confrontation with Isabella happened 2 weeks later, not by chance, but by design. He had to see the wreckage up close. He found her at her gallery, the Rossi Contemporary. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and it was empty. The vibrant, edgy art on the walls seemed to mock the funereal silence of the space. A small, discreet sign on the door read "For lease." She was packing canvases into a crate, her movements listless. The emerald dress was gone, replaced by jeans and a faded sweater. The fiery ambition in her eyes had been extinguished, leaving behind the dull ash of defeat. "Hello, Izzy," he said from the doorway. She jumped, a small cry escaping her lips. When she saw him, her face hardened. "What do you want, Julian?" "A post-mortem," he said, walking slowly into the space. He gestured at the empty room. "Looks like the IR Holdings venture didn't pan out." "Don't you dare," she hissed, her voice trembling with a rage born of humiliation. "You did this. You built this fantasy and you dragged me into it. You lied to me. It wasn't our future. It was your escape hatch, and you made me the unwitting accomplice. And when my wife and her father offered you a better deal, you took it." He stated, his voice devoid of accusation, a mere statement of fact. "You signed their affidavit. You sat in that boardroom and you stuck the knife in. They showed me prison sentences, Julian." She cried, throwing down a roll of bubble wrap. "They showed me my name on financial documents I didn't understand, for crimes I didn't know I was committing. You used my name, my signature, to steal from your own company. Did you think I would go to jail for you? For a man who was ignoring my calls. The second things got difficult. For a man who abandoned me outside a restaurant." He had no answer for that, because she was right. He had seen her as an accessory, a beautiful component of his new life. He had never considered her a partner. He had never considered her at all. "She won, you know," Isabella said, her voice dropping to a bitter whisper. "Your wife. She got everything. The company, the money. She even paid the remaining lease on this gallery. A charitable donation from the New Ethereum Foundation. It was her final move. To own the very ground my dream died on. She didn't just want to win. She wanted to salt the earth." Julian looked around at the barren white walls. He felt a sudden, strange pang of something that wasn't quite pity, but a shared sense of ruin. They were two sides of the same counterfeit coin he had tried to mint. Both of them had been dazzled by the same promise of a glorious future, and both were left with nothing. "Goodbye, Isabella," he said, and walked away, the scent of dust and failure clinging to him. 6 months passed. The seasons turned indifferent to human drama. Julian's life shrank. The legal battles ended not with a bang, but a whimper. A settlement was reached. To avoid prosecution, he relinquished all claims to any Ethereum stock and all contested assets. The SEC levied a historic fine that consumed the last of his untangled personal wealth. He was left with a fraction of his former fortune, enough to live on, but not enough to ever matter again. He now lived in a one-bedroom rental in Long Island City, a place chosen for its sweeping views of the Manhattan skyline he could no longer touch. The ghost of his former life taunted him daily from across the river. He learned the rhythms of a normal life. the screech of the 7 train, the price of milk, the anonymity of being just another face in the crowd. The Tom Ford suits were replaced by jeans and unremarkable sweaters. Julian Croft, the Titan, was gone. In his place was just Julian, a man haunted by what-ifs. One raw March afternoon, he was sitting in a small coffee shop, nursing a single cup for over an hour, scrolling through the news on a second-hand laptop. And then he saw it. An article in the Wall Street Journal's business section. The headline was a gut-punch phoenix from the ashes. How Eleanor Vance Croft resurrected Ethereum and redefined tech leadership. He clicked on it with a morbid, self-punishing curiosity. The article was effusive, detailing how she had not only salvaged the Helios merger, but had renegotiated it on terms far more favorable to Ethereum. It spoke of her calm, ethical leadership, her focus on sustainable growth over reckless disruption. She had purged the company of his cronies and replaced them with a team loyal to her vision. She was being hailed as a new icon, a different kind of visionary. And then there was the picture. It was taken at a press conference. Eleanor stood at a podium, looking powerful and serene. The cool Vance poise was still there, but it was warmed by a new, softer confidence. In her arms, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, she held their son for the world to see. Julian's breath caught in his throat. He zoomed in on the image. The baby had a full head of dark hair like his. The caption underneath delivered the final crushing blow: Eleanor Vance Croft with her son Arthur Vance Croft. Arthur Vance Croft. They had kept his name, but only as a subordinate clause, an afterthought appended to the 2 names that had defeated him. The boy was a Vance, first a symbol of her family's triumph. He was a legacy Julian could see but never claim. He stared at the picture of the child he would never hold, the son who would be raised to see his own father, as a cautionary tale. A profound, hollow ache spread through his chest, a grief for a life that was his, and that he had carelessly, arrogantly thrown away. Across the river into the top-floor office that was once his Eleanor Vance Croft ended a conference call with the Tokyo board. She swiveled in her chair and looked out at the same skyline Julian saw, but from the pinnacle, not the exile. Her life was a whirlwind of board meetings, market analyses, and strategy sessions, but it was punctuated by sacred, quiet moments. Her son Arthur was asleep in a bassinet in a small private annex to her office. Her father had been skeptical of the arrangement at first, but Eleanor had been firm. She would not sacrifice her role as a mother for her role as a CEO. She would redefine the job to encompass both. She walked over and looked down at her sleeping son. He was the reason. He was the answer to every why. When she had discovered the full extent of Julian's financial treason, her first instinct had been to simply divorce him, to take her money and run. But then she had felt the first kick inside her. It was a flutter, a tiny spark of life that ignited a fire in her. This was no longer just about her. It was about her child's legacy, about protecting his birthright from the man who was willing to gamble it all away. Her father Arthur entered without knocking, a rare smile on his face. "Helios signed," he said simply. "The deal is done. Your terms." "Our terms, Dad," she corrected, smiling back. Their relationship had changed. He no longer saw her as the daughter to be protected, but as the successor he had always hoped for, the one who had finally emerged from the crucible. "You've done well, Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with pride. He looked at the sleeping baby. "You've secured his future." "I've secured our future," she said, placing a hand on the bassinet. Later that evening, after the city had lit up like a field of scattered diamonds, Eleanor stood by the vast window holding her son. She thought back to that night at Celeste, to the icy calm that had descended upon her as she walked toward that table. She had gone there expecting to be hurt, but she had not expected to find her purpose. Julian had toasted a fantasy, a shallow future built on lies. She had responded by seizing the truth, a tangible future built on strength, legacy, and the unshakable power of a woman who had been underestimated for the last time. He had wanted a new life without her, and in the end that was the one thing she had given him. He was free of his gilded cage, while she had taken the gold and forged it into a crown. In the end, Julian Croft's grand toast celebrated a future that never was. He learned the hardest lesson the world of power has to teach, that true strength isn't about loud declarations, but quiet resolve. Eleanor Croft didn't just walk away from a failed marriage. She walked into her own destiny, proving that the most effective revenge is to build a better life, a stronger apple on the rubble of betrayal. The whisper of silk, the glint of a diamond, the sweet scent of impending fatherhood. Amelia had orchestrated the perfect surprise. A gift not just of luxury, but of love sent to her husband's gleaming corporate office. It was a testament to their shared future, a future she carried gently within her. But in the sterile air of that high-rise, another woman's hands adorned with rings he'd also bought would tear open the carefully wrapped package. The scream that followed wasn't one of delight. It was a sound that would shatter the pristine facade of their perfect life, exposing a web of deceit so intricate that the truth would be the most devastating blow of all. Amelia traced the rim of her porcelain teacup, the delicate floral pattern a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. From the 35th floor of their penthouse apartment, the city sprawled beneath her like a glittering tapestry, a world she and Julian had conquered together. Or rather, a world Julian had conquered and she had graciously adorned. Her reflection in the panoramic window showed a woman who had everything a husband whose name echoed in the halls of finance, a home that graced the covers of architectural magazines, and a baby, their baby nestled safely in her womb. She was 6 months along the gentle swell of her stomach, a constant, wondrous reminder of the new life she was nurturing. This pregnancy, a hard-won miracle after years of quiet heartbreak, had cemented what she believed to be an unbreakable bond with Julian. He had been ecstatic, his usual cool demeanor melting away to reveal a man of surprising tenderness. He'd ordered a custom-built crib from a bespoke furniture maker in Italy, filled a room with every conceivable baby gadget, and massaged her swollen ankles every night with a devotion that brought tears to her eyes. Julian was a man of grand gestures. Their life was a testament to it. Their wedding had been a week-long affair on the Amalfi Coast. Her birthdays were marked by surprise trips to Paris or the acquisition of a rare piece of art. He'd once bought out an entire Michelin-starred restaurant for a private dinner, simply because she'd mentioned a craving for their truffle pasta. He called her his queen, his everything. And Amelia, swept away by the sheer force of his affection and the dazzling world he provided, had believed it. Every single word. Today was the anniversary of the day they'd first met. A detail she was sure Julian, in his whirlwind of meetings and multi-million-dollar deals, had forgotten. But Amelia hadn't. She cherished these small, intimate milestones. They were the invisible threads that wove their grand love story together. To commemorate it, she had planned a surprise that was both deeply personal and a nod to the life he so meticulously curated. She had commissioned a one-of-a-kind timepiece, a Patek Philippe Calatrava with a secret inscription on the back. It wasn't a flamboyant, diamond-encrusted model. It was classic, elegant, timeless. Everything she felt their love was. The inscription was a line from a poem they'd both loved in college, a poignant reminder of their humbler beginnings before the towering skyscrapers and private jets. My soul, your soul, 2 stars in the same sky. But the watch was only part of the gift. Tucked inside the luxurious, lacquered box was a small, silver-plated frame. Inside it wasn't a photo of them, but the first sonogram picture of their baby, the tiny, grainy image that had made Julian weep with joy. And beside it, a handwritten note on her thick, cream-colored stationery. My dearest Julian, remember the starry nights on that rusty fire escape, dreaming of a future we could barely imagine today on the anniversary of our first hello. I wanted to give you something to remind you that even in our dazzling sky, some stars shine just for us. This little one is our newest star. I love you more than words can say. Happy anniversary. Forever yours, Amelia. She smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes. It was perfect. She had arranged for a premium courier service, the kind that handled priceless art and sensitive tournaments, to deliver it to his office at precisely 3 p.m. She imagined his surprise, his colleagues catching a glimpse of the devoted family man behind the ruthless CEO. She pictured him calling her, his voice thick with emotion, thanking her for remembering, for loving him so completely. The courier, a man in a crisp uniform, arrived exactly on time. He handled the elegantly wrapped package with the reverence it deserved. Amelia gave him the address. Sterling Whitcroft Holdings, 48th floor, 1 Vanderbilt, Manhattan. The name of the building itself was a symbol of power and prestige, a fitting stage for her grand romantic gesture. Please ensure this is handed directly to Mr. Julian Croft, she instructed, pressing a generous tip into the courier's hand. It's of immense personal value. Of course, Mrs. Croft. It will be delivered with the utmost care. As the door clicked shut, a wave of contentment washed over her. She settled onto the plush velvet sofa, picking up a book on motherhood. The afternoon sun streamed in, casting a warm glow on the pages. For the next hour, she was lost in a world of feeding schedules and developmental milestones, her heart full of a quiet, unshakable joy. She was Amelia Croft, the cherished wife of a brilliant man, soon to be the mother of his child. Her world was perfect, secure, and shimmering with love. The scream that would tear it all apart was still hours away, an impossible sound in a life so meticulously soundproofed from reality. Julian's office was an extension of his personality, sleek, modern, and intimidating. Glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city, but the real power was inside the room. A massive mahogany desk, an array of monitors displaying fluctuating market data, and a collection of abstract art that was both expensive and emotionally distant. It was a space designed to communicate dominance. His executive assistant, a woman in her late 50s with a stern but efficient demeanor, guarded the entrance to this inner sanctum like a hawk. She vetted his calls, managed his impossible schedule, and could spot a sycophant from a mile away. Her name was Margaret, and she was fiercely loyal to Julian. She was also, Amelia knew, fond of her. Margaret often commented on how Amelia was a calming influence on her demanding boss. When the courier arrived at the 48th floor, it was Margaret he met. A package for Mr. Julian Croft, the courier announced, presenting the beautifully wrapped box. Personal delivery. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. It wasn't unusual for gifts to arrive, but this had a different feel. It was elegant, personal, not the usual ostentatious corporate gift basket. She recognized the expensive wrapping paper, the same kind Amelia had used for Julian's last birthday gift. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. "Thank you. I'll see that he gets it," she said, signing the electronic pad. She carried the gift towards Julian's office, her heels clicking softly on the polished marble floor. The glass door was slightly ajar, and she could hear voices from within. Julian's deep, confident tone and a lighter, feminine laugh that was decidedly not Amelia's. Margaret paused. This was the delicate part of her job, the part she hated, the part where she had to navigate the other side of Julian Croft's life, the side that Amelia in her gilded cage knew nothing about. The laugh belonged to Cassandra. Cassandra was a senior analyst in the mergers and acquisitions department. She was whip-smart, ambitious, and stunningly beautiful in a way that was the polar opposite of Amelia's classic elegance. Where Amelia was soft curves and gentle smiles, Cassandra was sharp angles and a predatory gaze. She had raven black hair, cut in a severe, stylish bob, and a wardrobe of form-fitting dresses that were just on the edge of office-appropriate. She was a shark in a sea of sharks, and she had set her sights on Julian Croft from the day she'd walked into the firm. Margaret had seen it all unfold. The late-night strategy sessions, the business trips that coincidentally involved a layover in a romantic city, the lingering touches and shared glances that crackled with an energy that had nothing to do with stock prices. She despised Cassandra, not just for the blatant affair, but for the danger she posed to the kind, unsuspecting woman who was carrying Julian's child. She could hear their conversation more clearly now. "The deal is sealed. We'll announce the acquisition on Monday," Julian was saying. "We should celebrate." Cassandra purred, her voice dripping with suggestion. "My place tonight. I'll open that bottle of single malt you like." "I can't tonight, Cass. Amelia is—" He trailed off, but Margaret could fill in the blank. "Amelia is pregnant. Amelia is waiting for me at home." "Right." The little wifey Cassandra's tone was laced with a derision she barely tried to conceal. "How is she, by the way?" Still enjoying her life as a professional lunchgoer, Margaret's hand tightened on the package. The insult to Amelia was a physical blow. She despised this woman's cruelty. "Be nice." Julian's voice was firm, but it lacked real conviction. He never defended Amelia with the ferocity he used to defend a business deal. "I'm just saying," Cassandra continued, undeterred. "You're here closing the biggest deal of the year, a titan of the industry, and she's at home." "What, picking out nursery colours?" "It's a bit of a mismatch, don't you think?" Before Julian could respond, Margaret decided to make her presence known. She knocked sharply on the doorframe. "Julian. A personal delivery for you." Julian looked up, his expression shifting from one of intimate conspiracy to professional command in a split second. Cassandra, however, didn't bother to school her features. She shot Margaret a look of pure annoyance, angry at the interruption. "Bring it in." "Margaret," Julian said, gesturing towards his desk. As Margaret walked in, Cassandra's eyes landed on the gift. Her expression changed from annoyance to a covetous curiosity. It was clearly expensive, clearly personal, and in Cassandra's mind, anything personal and expensive belonging to Julian should by rights be related to her. "Ooh, what's this?" "An admirer?" she asked, stepping forward. She ran a perfectly manicured finger over the silk ribbon. "Let me guess. A gift from the board for closing the Henderson deal." "It's from my wife, Julian," said a little too quickly. He made a move to take the box, but Cassandra was faster. With a playful, possessive flick of her wrist, she snatched it from Margaret's grasp. From Amelia, Cassandra's red lips curled into a smirk. How sweet. What did she get? Another set of monogrammed handkerchiefs. Cassandra, give it to me. Julian's voice held a warning tone. This was a line he wasn't prepared to cross in front of his assistant. But Cassandra was fueled by arrogance and a desire to needle him, to assert her place in his life. She saw herself not as the mistress, but as his true partner, the one who understood his world of power and ambition. Amelia was just a domestic accessory. Oh, don't be such a spoil sport. Darling, she cooed, her voice loud enough for anyone passing in the hallway to hear. I want to see what perfect taste your perfect wife has. Let's open it together. And with that, before Julian or Margaret could react, Cassandra's sharp, blood-red nails tore into the elegant wrapping paper. She ripped it open with a careless, almost violent motion, a stark contrast to the love and care with which Amelia had wrapped it just hours before. The lid of the Patek Philippe box was revealed. Cassandra's eyes widened with genuine surprise and a flash of greed. Well, well, Mrs. Croft has expensive taste, she murmured, lifting the heavy lid. The classic, understated beauty of the Calatrava gleamed up at them. For a moment there was silence. Julian stared, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Margaret held her breath, a sense of dread coiling in her stomach. And then Cassandra saw what was nestled beside the watch. She picked up the small silver frame. She tilted it towards the light. Her brow furrowed in confusion. And then she saw it, the grainy black and white image. The unmistakable shape of a fetus, her face a mask of triumphant arrogance, just seconds before contorted. The color drained from her cheeks, her crimson lips parted. And then she screamed. It wasn't a scream of surprise or delight. It was a raw, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated shock and horror. A sound of a carefully constructed reality, shattering into a million pieces. A sound that echoed through the glass-walled office out into the hushed professional quiet of the 48th floor. A primal cry of a secret blown wide open. The scream ripped through the sterile air of the 48th floor, sharp and visceral. It was a sound that didn't belong amidst the quiet hum of servers and the muted ringing of phones. Heads popped up over cubicle walls. The low murmur of business chatter ceased. In that one piercing moment, every eye on the floor was turned towards the glass-walled office of Julian Croft. Inside the scene was frozen. Julian stood, his face a ghastly shade of pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of fury and panic. Margaret was rooted to the spot, her professional composure finally cracking as she stared at the unfolding disaster, and Cassandra was trembling. Her hand clapped over her mouth, as if to shove the scream back down her throat. Her other hand still held the silver frame, but her knuckles were white, her grip so tight it threatened to crush the delicate object. What is this?" she finally whispered, her voice a ragged, broken thing. She thrust the sonogram picture towards Julian, her eyes wild and accusing. "What is this?" "Julian!" Julian finally jolted into action, lunged forward and snatched the frame from her hand. He grabbed the watchbox, shoving the picture and the handwritten note back inside with clumsy, frantic movements. "Get out!" he hissed at Cassandra, his voice low and venomous. "Get out now!" But Cassandra wasn't listening. Her gaze was locked on his face, searching for an answer, a denial, anything. You told me you were leaving her. You said the marriage was just for appearances, a business arrangement. Her voice began to rise again, teetering on the edge of hysteria. You don't have a baby with a business arrangement, Julian. I said. Get out! He roared, his voice finally exploding, echoing his earlier command, but now filled with raw, desperate anger. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh, and began to physically propel her towards the door. Let go of me, she shrieked, struggling against his grip. You lied to me. All this time you've been lying to me. The spectacle was now on full display for the entire senior management floor. Colleagues, rivals, and subordinates alike were staring their faces a mixture of shock, fascination, and thinly veiled schadenfreude. The pristine facade of Julian Croft, the untouchable master of the universe, was cracking right before their eyes. Margaret, her training kicking in, moved swiftly to the door. Everything is fine, she announced in a firm, commanding voice to the gawking crowd. Mr. Croft is handling a private matter. Please return to your work. She pulled the door shut, the click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the charged silence. She then turned back to the chaos within. Julian had managed to shove Cassandra out of his office, slamming the door behind her. He leaned against it, his chest heaving, his tie askew. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time Margaret had ever seen. He looked cornered, trapped. Through the glass wall they could see Cassandra stumbling back to her own desk, a trail of stunned and whispering colleagues in her wake. She collapsed into her chair, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with violent sobs. The damage was done. The secret was out. The carefully compartmentalized worlds of Julian Croft had just collided with the force of a nuclear explosion. Julian turned his eyes, finally landing on Margaret. His expression was one of pure fury, but it was the desperate fury of a man who has lost control. Not a word of this to anyone, Margaret, he seethed, especially not to Amelia. Do you understand me? Margaret met his gaze, her own expression unreadable. For years, she had been his loyal soldier, his gatekeeper, the silent facilitator of his double life. She had rationalized it as part of the job, a necessary evil in the high-stakes world they inhabited. But the sound of Cassandra's scream, the sight of that tiny sonogram picture, had shifted something within her. It was no longer an abstract indiscretion. It was a betrayal of a woman she respected, a woman who was blissfully awaiting the birth of her child. She is going to call Julian. Margaret, said her voice, steady and cool. She is expecting you to thank her for your gift. What are you going to say? The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Julian stared at the Patek Philippe box on his desk as if it were a venomous snake. The gift, meant to be a symbol of love and shared history, had become an instrument of his exposure. Amelia's perfect, heartfelt gesture had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. He snatched the box, opened it, and pulled out the handwritten note. He read Amelia's loving words, her reference to their shared past, her excitement for their future. His face, already pale, seemed to lose another shade of color. The sincerity of her love, the purity of her intentions, was a searing indictment of his own duplicity. I'll handle it, he muttered, shoving the note into his pocket. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over Amelia's contact photo. A picture of her smiling, radiant on a beach in the Maldives. He looked like a man about to walk to his own execution. Meanwhile, back in her sun-drenched penthouse, Amelia was beginning to feel the first stirrings of unease. It was now well past 4 p.m. She had expected a call from Julian almost immediately. He was usually so prompt, so effusive in his gratitude for her gifts. She pictured the scene in his office again, but this time a small, unwelcome detail crept in the press of his schedule, an important meeting he couldn't leave, a sudden market crisis demanding his attention. She reassured herself. He was a busy man. That was part of the package. He would call when he could. She tried to go back to her book, but the words blurred on the page. She checked her phone. No missed calls. No messages. She decided to call him. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then it went to voicemail. "You've reached Julian Croft. I'm unavailable at the moment. Please leave a message." This was unusual. Julian prided himself on his accessibility, at least to her. His phone was an extension of his hand. For him not to answer was strange. For him not to have called her by now was almost unheard of. A tiny seed of anxiety began to sprout in the fertile ground of her waiting. She told herself she was being silly, that the pregnancy hormones were making her oversensitive. She made herself another cup of herbal tea, the steam warming her hands, but not the chill that was beginning to creep into her heart. Back on the 48th floor, Julian was staring at his phone, watching Amelia's call go to voicemail. He couldn't talk to her. Not now. Not when the sound of Cassandra's scream was still ringing in his ears. What would he say? How could he possibly feign the delight and emotion she would be expecting? His voice would betray him. His guilt was a physical thing, a sour taste in his mouth. He looked at the gift box. He had to hide it. He couldn't take it home. Amelia would expect to see him wearing the watch. She would ask where he had put the picture frame. The entire gift was now radioactive, a piece of evidence in a crime he was desperate to conceal. He looked at Margaret, his eyes pleading. "I need you to what, Julian?" She cut him off, her tone sharp. "To lie for you, to clean up this mess. My job is to manage your schedule, not your infidelities." The insubordination was shocking, and they both knew it. But Margaret had reached her limit. Julian's face hardened. "You will do what I tell you to do, Margaret. Your loyalty is to me and to this company. Your very generous salary depends on it." The threat hung in the air, ugly and undisguised. Margaret stared back at him, a silent battle of wills playing out between them. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years of complicity, she nodded. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice flat and devoid of its usual warmth. "Take this," he said, pushing the Patek Philippe box towards her. "Get it out of here. I don't care what you do with it. Sell it. Throw it in the Hudson River. Just make sure it disappears. And it never ever gets back to my wife." He then turned his attention to the more immediate problem, Cassandra. He strode out of his office, ignoring the renewed whispers and stares, and marched directly to her desk. "My office." "Now," he commanded. Cassandra, her face tear-streaked and blotchy, looked up at him with a mixture of hatred and heartbreak. She followed him back to his office, and he shut the door firmly behind them. "You have 5 minutes to pack your personal belongings," he said, his voice cold and devoid of any emotion. "Security will escort you from the building. Your severance package will be generous. But it is contingent on you signing a non-disclosure agreement, so comprehensive it will prevent you from even thinking my name." "Is that clear?" Cassandra stared at him aghast. "You're firing me." Her voice was a choked whisper. "After everything." After all your promises. The promises were based on a discretion you have just proven incapable of. Julian retorted icily. You created a scene. You disrupted the entire floor. You are a liability. The situation is over. You are over. The cruelty was breathtaking. The man who had whispered promises of a future together was now discarding her like a failed business venture. Cassandra's heartbreak curdled into a cold, hard rage. You think you can just get rid of me, she hissed. You think you can silence me with money. You have no idea who you're messing with, Julian. I know everything. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about the Cayman deal. I know where all the bodies are buried. You may have fired me from your company, but you are not rid of me. She turned and walked out of his office. Her head held high, leaving a stunned Julian in her wake. He had solved one problem by firing her, but he had just created a much, much bigger one. He had underestimated Cassandra's fury, and he had no idea just how far she would go to get her revenge. And miles away in the quiet luxury of her penthouse, Amelia looked at the clock. It was almost 5 p.m. The silence from her husband was no longer just strange. It was a screaming, gaping void that was starting to swallow her perfect world whole. She picked up her phone and dialed a different number. It was a number she rarely used, but one she knew by heart. It was Margaret's direct line at the office. Margaret. It's Amelia Croft, she said, trying to keep her voice light and casual. I'm so sorry to bother you, but I've been trying to reach Julian. Is he in a meeting? I sent a package over earlier, and I just wanted to make sure he received it. On the other end of the line, Margaret closed her eyes. She held the heavy Patek Philippe box in her lap. The lie Julian wanted her to tell felt like poison on her tongue. But the threat to her livelihood, the years of ingrained loyalty, and a flicker of misguided pity for the man whose life was imploding, made her hesitate. Yes, Mrs. Croft. Margaret began, her voice carefully neutral. He's just been pulled into an emergency conference call with the London office. The market is very volatile today. He did ask me to tell you that he received your gift and he loves it. He said he would call you the second he is free. The lie was delivered, the first of many, and as Amelia hung up, a wave of relief washed over her, chasing away the earlier anxiety. Of course, a market crisis. It all made sense. She was being silly, oversensitive. Her Julian was just busy conquering the world. He loved her gift. Everything was fine. But Margaret, as she placed the phone back in its cradle, felt a profound sense of shame. She looked at the expensive box in her lap, the symbol of a pure love that had been so cruelly desecrated. She thought of the furious, vengeful woman who had just been fired and the kind, pregnant woman who had just been lied to. And she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that this was far from over. This was just the beginning. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception. Julian returned home that evening, the very picture of the doting husband. He came bearing a bouquet of Amelia's favorite peonies and a story expertly crafted of a frantic day-long crisis involving a sudden currency devaluation that had threatened a major European acquisition. "I'm so sorry, my love," he said, enveloping her in a hug. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, his lips carefully avoiding hers. "I was chained to my desk all day." "Margaret told you I got your gift." Amelia melted into his embrace, her earlier anxieties seeming foolish and distant. "She did. I'm just glad everything is okay." "Did you like it?" she asked, her eyes searching his for the emotional response she had been anticipating all day. Julian's performance was flawless. He smiled a warm, crinkling smile that almost reached his eyes. Liked it, Amelia. I was speechless. It's magnificent. The Calatrava, it's a work of art, and the inscription, it took me right back to that fire escape. He paused, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But the picture, that was the real gift. I almost lost it right there in front of the entire board. It was exactly what she had wanted to hear. The perfect reaction. Yet a tiny, almost imperceptible detail felt off. He spoke the words with practiced ease, but the genuine, soul-shaking emotion she had expected to see in his eyes wasn't quite there. It was like watching a brilliant actor play a part rather than witnessing a true, heartfelt reaction. But she dismissed the feeling as quickly as it came. He was tired. It had been a long, stressful day. "Where is it?" she asked, a playful smile on her face. "I expected you to come home wearing it." Julian didn't miss a beat. "Are you crazy?" A Patek Philippe. That beautiful. I took one look at it and locked it straight in the office safe. It's far too valuable to be worn every day, and especially not on a day as chaotic as today. I'd be terrified of scratching it. We'll take it out for our anniversary dinner on Saturday. It was a plausible, even sensible explanation. It was so Julian, protective of beautiful, expensive things. And so Amelia accepted it. She accepted his excuses, his carefully constructed narrative, the slight distance in his kiss. She wanted to believe him. Her entire world, the very foundation of her happiness, depended on it. Life returned to its glossy, perfect rhythm. Julian went to the office, Amelia attended her prenatal yoga classes, and oversaw the final touches on the nursery. They talked about baby names, debated the merits of different strollers, and planned a baby moon in the Seychelles. Julian was attentive, charming, and affectionate, but Amelia couldn't shake a subtle, persistent feeling of unease. It was in the small things. He started keeping his phone face down on the nightstand, something he'd never done before. He was more jumpy, a sudden noise making him flinch. He claimed it was the residual stress from the market crisis, but there was a furtive, hunted look in his eyes that she'd never seen before. He also began to work later, claiming the European acquisition required late-night calls and endless paperwork. He would come home long after she had gone to bed, slipping under the covers, with the cool silence of a ghost. A week after the incident, Amelia had a doctor's appointment. It was a routine checkup, and she'd asked Julian to come with her, hoping they could hear the baby's heartbeat together again. He had agreed enthusiastically, but on the morning of the appointment, he called, his voice strained. "Darling, I'm so sorry. I'm completely swamped. We're in the final stages of due diligence on the Henderson deal. I can't possibly get away." "The Henderson deal?" Amelia asked, confused. "I thought that was the deal that closed last week, the one that caused the big crisis." There was a fractional pause on the other end of the line. No. That was the precursor. This is the final, painstaking legal work. It's incredibly tedious. I promise I'll be at the next one. Get me a new picture of our little star. Okay. She hung up, a knot of disappointment tightening in her chest. She went to the appointment alone, sitting in the waiting room, surrounded by beaming couples. She listened to the strong, rhythmic thump of her baby's heart, a sound of profound joy that was now tinged with a lonely sadness. That afternoon, needing a distraction, she decided to do some shopping. As she browsed in a high-end baby boutique, her phone buzzed. It was an email notification. The subject line was blank. The sender was an address she didn't recognize, Karma. RSA bitch at protonmail.com. Curiosity piqued, she opened it. There was no text, just a single attachment, a video file. Hesitantly, she tapped to download it, It was short, only about 15 seconds long, and the quality was grainy, clearly filmed on a phone from a distance. The video showed a man and a woman standing outside a sleek, modern apartment building at night. They were arguing. The man was Julian. The woman was beautiful with striking dark hair and a furious expression. Amelia's heart began to pound in her chest. She recognized the woman. She had seen her once or twice at company functions. Cassandra, an analyst from his firm. The audio was faint, but Amelia turned the volume all the way up, pressing the phone to her ear. "Can't just throw me away." Cassandra's voice was high and shrill. "The deal is done, Cassandra. It's over." Julian's voice was cold, dismissive. "Is it? Or are you just scared? Scared your perfect little wife will find out? Her perfect little life is a complete and utter lie." The video ended. Amelia stood frozen in the middle of the baby boutique, surrounded by soft pastels and cheerful animal motifs. The air left her lungs. A cold, terrifying dread, far worse than any anxiety she had felt before, washed over her. A lie. Her perfect life is a complete and utter lie. Her hands shaking, she stumbled out of the store, nearly colliding with another shopper. She hailed a taxi, her mind racing, trying to make sense of what she had just seen. An argument. It could be work-related. Cassandra had just been fired. Julian had told her for poor performance and a bad attitude. Maybe this was just the fallout from that. But Cassandra's words. "Scared your perfect little wife will find out." The words echoed in her head, a venomous chorus. No, it wasn't possible. Julian loved her. He was the father of her child. They were building a life together. This woman, this Cassandra, was just a bitter, disgruntled ex-employee trying to cause trouble. That had to be it. But the seed of doubt once planted had taken root, and it was growing its thorny vines wrapping around her heart. When she got home, the penthouse felt different. It was no longer a sanctuary. It felt like a stage, a beautifully decorated set for a play in which she was the unknowing lead. She walked into Julian's home office, a space she rarely entered. It was as immaculate as ever. She ran her hand over his desk, her eyes scanning for, she didn't even know what. Her gaze fell upon his briefcase, which he had left by his chair. On a sudden, uncharacteristic impulse, she opened it. Inside were files, a laptop, a leather-bound notebook. She picked up the notebook. His handwriting, a sharp, decisive script, filled the pages. It was mostly meeting notes, market analysis numbers. And then she saw it. Tucked into a side pocket of the notebook was a receipt. A jewelry receipt dated 2 months ago. It was from Cartier. The item purchased a Trinity ring. Amelia's breath caught. The Trinity ring. 3 interlocking bands of gold, a symbol of love, fidelity, and friendship. It was a beautiful, romantic piece, and Julian had not given it to her. Her mind flashed back to the video, to Cassandra's hands gesturing angrily. She remembered seeing the glint of gold on her finger. 3 interlocking bands. The blood drained from Amelia's face. She sank into Julian's leather office chair, the receipt trembling in her hand. This wasn't a disgruntled employee. This was his mistress. The late nights, the business trips, the sudden distance. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. The lie wasn't just in the video. The lie was her entire life. And then a worse thought, a thought so monstrous it made her feel physically ill. The gift. The Patek Philippe. The sonogram. The story about the office safe suddenly seemed laughably thin. The praise for the gift felt hollow, rehearsed. Why had he really hidden it? What had really happened that day? The pieces began to form a horrifying mosaic in her mind. The scream that Cassandra had let out in the video. It was a scream of shock. What if she hadn't been screaming at Julian in the street? What if she had screamed in his office? Amelia's mind raced back to the day she sent the gift. Her call to Margaret. Margaret's smooth, reassuring lie. He's in a conference call. He loves the gift. Margaret. Margaret would know. She was Julian's gatekeeper. She saw everything, heard everything. And despite her professional demeanor, Amelia had always felt a current of warmth from the older woman, a hint of sympathy. With a resolve she didn't know she possessed. Amelia stood up. The hurt, the betrayal. It was a physical weight threatening to crush her. But beneath it, something else was stirring. A cold, hard anger. She had been played for a fool. Her love, her pregnancy, her most sacred feelings had been used as props in his sordid drama. She would not be a victim. She would find out the truth. The whole truth. She picked up her phone and dialed Margaret's number again. This time there would be no polite inquiries. This time there would be no accepting easy lies. "Margaret," she said, when the assistant answered her voice dangerously quiet. "We need to talk. Not on the phone. In person. I'm coming to the office, now." Before Margaret could protest, Amelia hung up. She walked into her bedroom, her movements stiff and robotic. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. The soft, happy woman from a week ago was gone. In her place was a woman with haunted eyes and a grim, determined set to her mouth. She was a queen, just as Julian had always said, but a queen whose kingdom had been revealed to be built on lies, and she was about to go to war. The taxi ride to 1 Vanderbilt was a blur. The familiar Manhattan cityscape, once a symbol of her and Julian's shared success, now seemed hostile and alien. Every gleaming skyscraper felt like a monument to a lie. Amelia sat ramrod straight, her hands clasped tightly over her baby bump, a protective, primal gesture. The naive, trusting woman, who had so lovingly sent a gift to her husband, was gone, incinerated in the fire of his betrayal. In her place was a woman, forged in cold fury, her mind whirring with a chilling clarity. She didn't go to the main entrance. She knew the protocol, the way visitors were announced, the chance that Julian would be alerted to her presence. Instead, she remembered a private entrance on the side street that led to a discreet elevator bank sold by the top executives. Margaret had pointed it out to her once. It was a small detail, a piece of insider knowledge, and she would use it. She was done playing by the rules of a game that had been rigged against her from the start. When she stepped out onto the 48th floor, the atmosphere was thick with a tension she could now finally understand. The whispers she might have once dismissed as office gossip now sounded like echoes of her own humiliation. She saw the sideways glances, the sudden silences as she walked past. They knew. They had all known. They had watched the drama unfold while she sat in her penthouse, blissfully ignorant. She walked directly to Margaret's desk, her gaze unwavering. The older woman looked up, her face pale. She saw the look in Amelia's eyes, and her professional mask crumbled. What she saw was not the gentle Mrs. Croft, but a woman on the verge of shattering, held together only by sheer force of will. "Mrs. Croft. Amelia, you shouldn't be here," Margaret stammered, standing up. "Don't, Amelia," said her voice low and steady, cutting through Margaret's flustered greeting. Don't you dare lie to me again. Margaret, I know. I know about Cassandra. I know about the affair. Margaret's face fell. The years of carefully maintained composure dissolved into undisguised pity and regret. How she whispered. That doesn't matter, Amelia said, her voice sharp. What matters is what happened here last week. The day I sent the gift, I want you to tell me everything, every single detail. And if you value your conscience, you will not leave a single thing out. Julian was in a meeting in the main boardroom, a glass-walled enclosure in the center of the floor. He was visible to them, pacing, gesturing, commanding the room, completely unaware of the reckoning that was taking place just 50 feet away. Margaret hesitated, her eyes darting nervously towards Julian's office. Her loyalty, her job, her entire life was tied to that man. But then she looked back at Amelia. She saw the profound pain in her eyes, the slight tremble of her hands resting on her pregnant stomach. She thought of the beautiful, heartfelt gift and the ugly, violent way it had been desecrated. The lie she had told Amelia over the phone had been eating at her for a week. The guilt was a heavy, indigestible stone in her gut. He made me get rid of it, Margaret said, her voice barely a whisper. Amelia's blood ran cold. Get rid of what? The gift. The watch. The picture of your baby. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Cassandra was in his office when it arrived. She thought it was for her. She opened it, and she saw the sonogram. She screamed. The whole floor heard it. It was a disaster. The scene played out in Amelia's mind, a horrifying, vivid nightmare. The woman who was sleeping with her husband, her hands on the picture of their unborn child. The scream, the humiliation. It was infinitely worse than anything she could have imagined. And Julian. Amelia pressed her voice devoid of emotion. What did he do? He fired her. Right on the spot. Then he gave me the box and told me to make it disappear. He was terrified you would find out. Where is it now? Amelia's question was like a shard of ice. Margaret swallowed hard. She reached down into the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet, a drawer she had kept locked all week. She pulled out the Patek Philippe box and placed it on the desk between them. Amelia stared at it. The elegant wrapping paper was gone, replaced by the stark lacquered wood. It looked like a tiny coffin. With trembling fingers, she opened the lid. The magnificent watch was there, gleaming cold and unused. Beside it, tucked away, was the silver frame with the sonogram and her handwritten note. She picked up the note. My soul, your soul. 2 stars in the same sky. The words, once a declaration of transcendent love, were now a bitter, mocking epitaph. A tear, hot and heavy, finally escaped her and splashed onto the expensive cream stationery, blurring the ink. She wiped the tear away with an angry gesture. This was not the time for weeping. This was the time for action. Thank you, Margaret, she said, her voice regaining its strength. She closed the box. You've done the right thing. She looked over at the glass boardroom. Julian's meeting was wrapping up. People were starting to stand, shaking hands. He would be out in minutes. Margaret Amelia said, a new chilling plan forming in her mind. Does this company have a town hall meeting scheduled any time soon? An all-hands meeting for the entire New York office. Margaret looked confused. Yes, there's one this Friday. Julian is the keynote speaker. It's a big quarterly address. Perfect, Amelia said. She gave Margaret a look of such intense, cold resolve that the older woman physically recoiled. "I want you to do one more thing for me. And this time, it's not for Julian. It's for me. And for every woman who has ever been made to feel like a fool." 2 days later, on Friday, the auditorium at Sterling Whitcroft Holdings was packed. Hundreds of employees, from fresh-faced interns to seasoned senior partners, filled the tiered seats. There was a buzz of anticipation in the air. The quarterly town hall was a major event, a chance to hear directly from the CEO. But today, the anticipation was laced with something else: gossip. The story of Cassandra's dramatic, screaming exit and swift dismissal had spread like wildfire. Everyone knew something had happened, but the details were murky, speculative. Julian Croft stood at the podium on the brightly lit stage, looking every inch the powerful, confident leader. He was dressed in a bespoke suit, his voice resonant and assured as he spoke about quarterly earnings, market projections, and the company's bright future. He was in his element, the master of his universe. The chaos of the previous week firmly behind him. He had dealt with Cassandra. He had placated Amelia. The storm had passed. He was just moving into his closing remarks, a rallying cry about integrity and teamwork, when the main doors at the back of the auditorium swung open. A figure was silhouetted in the doorway. It was a woman. As she walked down the central aisle, a stunned silence fell over the room. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people recognized her. It was Amelia Croft. She looked radiant, ethereal. She was wearing a simple but elegant white dress that accentuated her pregnancy. Her hair was styled perfectly, her makeup flawless. She looked like an angel, an avenging angel. Julian stopped mid-sentence, his words dying in his throat. His face went ashen. He stared at her, his confident posture collapsing, a look of pure, unadulterated terror in his eyes. He knew in that instant that his world was about to end. Amelia didn't look at him. She walked calmly and deliberately towards the stage, her heels clicking with a steady, resolute rhythm on the floor. In her hands, she carried the Patek Philippe box. As she reached the short set of stairs leading to the stage, a few security guards started to move towards her, unsure of how to react. But Amelia simply gave them a serene, dismissive glance, and they stopped confused. She walked onto the stage and approached the podium, stopping directly in front of her husband. She could feel the collective gaze of hundreds of people on her, could hear the frantic whispering. She ignored it all. Her focus was entirely on Julian. She leaned into the microphone, her voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the cavernous room. "My husband," she began, her voice ringing with a strength no one in that room had ever heard from her, "is a man who speaks about integrity, about loyalty, about the values that make this company great." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Julian was frozen, paralyzed, a statue of a guilty man. "He is also a man of grand gestures," she continued, her voice gaining an edge. "And recently, to celebrate a personal milestone, the anniversary of the day we met, I decided to make a grand gesture of my own." She held up the lacquered box for the entire auditorium to see. The giant screens on either side of the stage, which had been displaying stock charts, now showed a close-up of her face, her expression one of heartbreaking composure. "I bought him this," she said, her voice starting to tremble, but with rage, not weakness. "A Patek Philippe watch, a symbol of timeless love." But that wasn't the real gift. She opened the box and took out the small silver frame. She held it up. The camera zoomed in, and the grainy image of the sonogram filled the screens. A collective gasp went through the audience. This was the real gift, she said, her voice breaking for a moment. Our baby. Our future. I sent it to his office, hoping to surprise him to share a moment of joy. She turned her gaze fully on Julian, her eyes locking with his. All the love she had ever felt for him was gone, replaced by a contempt so profound it was like a physical force. But I was not the only one who saw it. My husband's mistress, Cassandra Miller, a senior analyst he was sleeping with for over a year, opened it first. She saw the picture of my baby, the baby of the man who had promised to leave his wife for her, and she screamed. The auditorium erupted. The whispers turned into a roar of shock and scandal. This was better, more salacious than any rumor. This was a confession, a public crucifixion. He lied to me. Amelia's voice soared over the din filled with righteous fury. He fired his mistress to silence her. He took this beautiful gift, this symbol of our family, and he ordered it to be destroyed, to be hidden, so he could continue to live his lie. He stood in our home, looked me in the eye, and told me he loved it while secretly trying to erase its existence. She placed the sonogram picture on the podium, directly in front of Julian. Then she picked up the watch, the magnificent, priceless Patek Philippe Calatrava. My husband values beautiful, expensive things, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. He builds his life around them. He acquires them. He controls them. Women companies watches. It's all the same to him. And then, in a move that no one could have predicted, she drew back her arm, and with all her strength, she threw the Patek Philippe watch across the stage. It hit the far wall with a sickening crack and clattered to the floor. Its delicate mechanism shattered its timeless beauty, destroyed in an instant. The sound echoed through the silent, stunned auditorium. Amelia turned back to the microphone, her face a mask of triumphant, heartbreaking resolve. The assets of this man, of this company, may be vast, she declared, her voice ringing with the authority of a queen who had just reclaimed her throne. But his integrity is bankrupt, his loyalty is worthless. And as for my assets, the shares in this company that I own in my own name, a very significant portion, I believe, they will be on the market by the end of the day. I believe the term is a hostile takeover. I'm sure you all, as experts in the field, know what that means. She looked one last time at the broken man who had been her husband. His face was slack with shock, his empire crumbling around him on a stage of his own making. Without another word, Amelia Croft turned and walked off the stage, her back straight, her head held high. She did not look back. She walked out of the auditorium, out of the building, and out of the life that had almost destroyed her, leaving behind a storm of her own creation. The Queen had not just left the board. She had flipped the entire table. Amelia's story is a powerful reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to the surface. It's a story of devastating betrayal, but also one of incredible strength and the fierce, unyielding power of a woman reclaiming her own narrative. The shattered watch was more than just a broken object. It was the sound of a gilded cage being smashed to pieces. What happens next? Does Julian's empire truly crumble? Does Amelia, with her newfound power and the impending birth of her child, find a new kind of happiness? The fallout from that day would echo for years to come. If this story captivated you, if you felt every moment of Amelia's pain and cheered for her ultimate triumph, please let us know. in the comments. We want to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a story of justice and resilience, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more gripping tales you won't want to miss. Click the notification bell so you're the first to know when our next story drops. Thank you for listening.